In the last section, we used our user model to create a new instance of a user, which we labeled Joe. One thing I want to make sure is crystal clear is that when we create a new model like this, Joe does not automatically get saved to our database, so he's not persisted. Right now, Joe is just sitting inside of memory inside of our program, and it's 100% up to us to make sure that we actually save him to get it saved to our database. We also, in the last section, outlined a 3-step process for writing in our test here to make sure that we know how to save a user to our database. First, we would create an instance of a user, which we just did. Second, we would save this instance to our database. And then number 3, we would write some code to make sure that our user was successfully saved to the database. All right, so that's our 3-step plan. Again, we've already done step 1 right here, so now it's time to move on to step 2. Inserting records into our database, I'm going to say it's both challenging and simple at the same time. It is simple because the basic syntax for saving a record is really easy to remember, but it is a little bit more complicated because there's a lot of considerations around saving a model that are going to come into play as we start to explore some of the advanced functionality of Mongoose. So right now, we're very lucky because we get to just do the very simple thing to save a model. To save an instance of a model, like if we want to save Joe to our database, if we want to persist him to the database, we will write joe.save, like so. So this line right here actually reveals a lot of information to us about how Mongoose works. Joe, like this object right here, whatever got returned from new user, is clearly not a plain JavaScript object, right? It clearly is not just consisting of like name : Joe. By calling save, it's really, what that means is calling new user right here must return an object with a bunch of functions, a bunch of functionality tied to it by default. So this instance of user right here, Joe, has a ton of functions attached to it that we can call at any given time, one of which is save, and we'll use many other functions over time as well. So once this line of code right here executes, I'm going to expect that Mongoose attempts to insert this record into our database. I think that what would be a really good test right now is to not really worry about running our Mocha tests or writing in an assertion or anything like that. I think that what would be really nice is if we just ran this file as is, and then we use RoboMongo to check out our database and make sure that this thing actually gets saved to it. All right, so let's go down that path. We're going to take a little bit of a diversion right now. So to run this file, we will run our test suite. And it's totally okay that we don't actually have any assertions in here or anything like that. We just want to make sure that this line of code is actually executed. So inside of my terminal, I'm going to run my test suite by running the command npm run test. Remember, this is the test command that we just set up. So I'll run this. And we get a creating records, saves user, everything's green for what it's worth. One thing that's really worth noting is that if you do not make an assertion inside of a it block, which we are currently not doing inside of here, right? We're not calling assert or anything like that. Mocha will just assume that all of your tests passed. So even though we don't actually have any tests or any assertions inside of here, it just thinks, yeah, sure, whatever, everything looks good, sounds great. All right, so in theory now, we have called joe.save, which means our record should be inside of Mongo. So I'm going to open up RoboMongo, which we installed a little bit ago. So here's RoboMongo. I'm going to open it up. And then I'm going to connect to our local database, our local instance of MongoDB. Once I click connect, I see my local instance pop up on the left-hand side. You'll notice that I have users test in here already. Users test, the database, was created the instant that we connected to that database inside of our test helper file using mongoose.connect. So if you recall inside of here, we said, hey Mongoose, when you connect to our local instance of Mongo, create a new database in there called users test. So the instant that we connected to Mongoose and saved a record, Mongo automatically created a new database called users test inside of there. So I'm going to open up this database, and I'm going to open up this folder called collections. And then inside of here, I'm going to find this users collection. All right, So this is it. This is our users collection. This is where all of the different users that we will create inside of our application will be saved. We'll end up having one user per line in here. Right now, it would appear so we have just a single user. If I expand this record, you'll notice that I have a name of Joe inside of here. And so clearly, this is the user that we just attempted to save inside of our test file. You'll also notice that Joe, when it was created, was automatically assigned an ID property, specifically _ID, and it has a value of this long string. One thing that I want to point out, like really particular, because this is a total gotcha in Mongo, like total gotcha, it's something that will bite you in the rear. Whenever you want to refer to an ID of a record, you might be tempted to just say like, oh yeah, just here's the string, the like raw ID. In fact, when data gets or an ID gets stored inside of Mongo, it gets wrapped with this helper called object ID, which is an object that helps Mongo just kind of keep track of its IDs. We'll talk a lot more later about what this object ID thing is right here and the impact that it has on some of the queries that we write whenever we use the core or like underlying Mongo drivers rather than using Mongoose. All right, anyways, that's getting a little bit off topic. I apologize for that. The real important thing here is that we ran our test file, we created Joe, and then we saved Joe to our database, and we automatically saw him appear to pop up inside of here, exactly what we wanted. So clearly, Joe is getting persisted to our database. There's just one small little thing that I want to check out. I want to run my tests again. So at the command line, I'm going to again run npm run test. I'm going to run this thing. And okay, everything looks good again. And now I'm going to come back over to RoboMongo. And I'm going to refresh my table or my collection here by pressing Command R. On Windows, it's probably Control R. When I do that, you'll see that now I have two records inside of here. I have the original Joe that we created the first time, and then I got another Joe from when we just ran it again. Every single time that I run npm run test, it creates a new user inside of my user collection. So I want to ask you, do you think that in a testing environment, would this be a bad thing to have happen? I'm going to let you ponder that a little bit, and we'll continue the next section, and we'll decide whether or not this is a bad thing to have happen inside of a testing environment. So think about it for just a second, and then we'll make a decision in the next section.